Welcome back to Real House DIY. Today I'm going to share some tips and tricks for drywall installation. First, I like to start with a fully closed room. As you can see, we have new construction and we have the existing front door and windows to the house. I'm leaving this all closed up. Drywall cutting and installing makes a lot of dust. After your joint compound is done, you're going to be sanding a bit. That's going to make a lot more dust. It's best to keep that all perfectly enclosed. This is a very easy solution versus putting up plastic. Before you start your drywall, use a straight edge. Check that all your studs are on the same plane. If you have any rocking, use a power hand plane to knock that down, any high spots. And that will help with getting your drywall sitting perfectly nice and flat on the wall. Let's take a quick look after having done joint compound. Here's an example of two drywall sheets coming together that are nice and flat on the same plane. You can see that they're drying evenly. And we'll come over here. And this one, you can see I didn't catch this. The stud that these two drywall panels are coming into is probably slightly tilted to the left. I didn't catch that. And you can see that it's drying faster on this side where it's a thinner coat. It's a thicker coat on this side because this panel is sitting just slightly in more. So that'll take me a little bit more work to get nice and flat, and then I'll probably have to do some additional work feathering it out, because when you shine a light on this sideways, when it's all said and done, you would see that unevenness. So I'll need to feather this out pretty far with some light coats to get that looking nice and flat after it's all done and painted. For installing the drywall, you can get away with a drill driver. Much better just to get a drywall screw gun. Also, before you start installing drywall, you want to confirm all your studs are 16 inches on center. If anything's off a little bit, you can add a 2x3 or 2x4 up alongside a stud or wherever is needed to get the 16 inches on center. And you want to make sure you have support everywhere, not just the studs, but you should have the top plate and bottom plate at the ceiling and the floor, framing around any windows or doors, so that along all those edges of the drywall, everything will be supported. Cutouts for your electrical boxes, you want cut as tight as possible around the box. Mostly the reason these surfaces of the outlet, for example, need to sit on top of the drywall. You also want to add drywall screws near the top and bottom of any electrical boxes to make sure this part of the wall is nice and secure. For walls, 16 inches between drywall screws is the maximum that you want. I like to go a little closer at the edges. Ceilings generally want 12 inches maximum between drywall screws. Again, I put them closer together. I end up skim coating the entire ceiling anyway, so it doesn't matter as much on the ceiling. But for the walls, the more screws that you have, if you put them closer together, it's going to be more work with joint compound. When you're fitting your drywall to an edge, the floor, ceiling, or at the wall edge, in these corners, always do your measurement a 1/4 inch less and make sure it fits. If you try to do an exact measurement, it's going to be too tight somewhere, and then you're going to be left cutting a little bit of sliver off. It's a lot more work to do that rather than get the measurement correct, just a little bit under in the first place. I always leave a gap at the floor. I use that using spacers. I use paint stirrers to put under the wall right there. If there's ever any moisture on the floor, then it won't be going up into the drywall. When you're taking measurements for cutouts, for example, or any other cutouts around windows, doors, you always want to get your measurement from the same reference point for horizontal and vertical. This one for the horizontal, you're going to want to take your measurement from this edge where the other drywall sheet meets. So when it's straight up against that, then it's going to be the correct measurement to the box that way. And I always usually go from the floor up, accounting for the gap that I'm adding at the floor. Installing a ceiling piece is going to be a bit tricky. Here I used an 8-foot step ladder. Step ladder came right a few inches from the ceiling. I was able to use a smaller step ladder to climb up, put the piece of drywall up into position, and just sit it on top of the tall step ladder. And then left my hands free to screw it in, get positioned perfectly. So working overhead is going to be really tiring on your neck and shoulders. You can also use supports in the wall. You can put screws or hooks into the sidewall to support the edge of your drywall while it's sitting up here before you get screwed into the ceiling. I also use long cutoffs of drywall here, a couple spots just to hold up this edge of the drywall. You can also use 2x4s, cut the size. After all the drywall is installed, but before I start with joint compound, I always take the knife, go over every single screw, make sure you don't hear it. Show you an example of one. This one here, you can hear the metal on metal. It actually went in at a slight angle, so this top right edge is sticking out. If you go and joint compound that, you can cover it, but it won't be completely flat anymore because that's sticking out further than the drywall edge. I just take a screwdriver whenever I come across one of those ones. Give that a quarter turn maybe. Still not breaking the drywall paper, of course. And now that's good. And when you put these drywall screws in, I've already checked these to make sure that the screw is beyond the level of the drywall. So we now know that we can get that perfectly flat and not a hump to cover that up. Hopefully with the drywall screw gun, you went straight 90 degrees in. You can kind of tell because the indent around the screw. On this one you can see maybe I was slightly in this direction. It's slightly more indented on this side. And hopefully your drywall screw gun wasn't adjusted to go too deep. One, you don't want to break the paper of the drywall. Two, you only want to go as deep as you have to, because this might only now require 2 coats of joint compound instead of 3. Some people, they go a little bit deeper and then they have to do 3 coats to get that completely flat. The first one mostly fills this in. It'll dry and shrink a little bit and you'll have a little bit of an indent. Second coat will get it nice and flat. And then hopefully no need to do a 3rd coat if you got your drywall screw in just deep enough. There's some cases where you'll need to hang your drywall horizontally instead of vertically. I always do vertically unless you have to do the horizontal. Reason is you get the tapered edges of the drywall here for this joint. When you put your mesh tape or paper tape on here in the joint compound, that'll make that perfectly flat after it's built up a little bit with the tapered edges. If you're hanging your drywall horizontally, you're going to have butt joints, which you'd prefer to have those at the ceiling and floor. If you have 2 butt joints coming in the middle of a wall, like here, for example, you're going to end up with a hump in the wall, which is very difficult to get that perfectly flat. You have to really feather it out really far, and still, it won't be perfectly flat. So for that reason, I always hang my drywall vertically. Here's one part of my project I could not get around having a small piece of drywall here. The reason, because we have this door in the middle. I needed full sheets at certain spots on either side of the door. And so right here in the middle of the door, I have one full length sheet, 48 inches, stopping right there. And I have like 1.5 inches right here. So for this, we got the tapered edge coming in here. And this one, I cut off a piece of tapered edge there so I can build this up with my tape and joint compound, and that will end up being perfectly flat. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It's coming up next. I've got tips and tricks for joint compound.